Hi, this is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Our guest today is Pat Schaeffer of Talent Strategy Partners, and Pat's going to talk about collaborative leadership as the key to innovation. So give a listen as we welcome Pat to our show. And welcome, Pat, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Jose. It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Pat, one thing that's always helpful to our listeners with our guests is to give them context. Is just who do you typically work with?
Sure. We typically work with senior leaders in organizations in lots of industries in many different sizes. And our work typically starts with some interviews with those executives to understand their perspectives and to understand the parameters about the work that we're going to do with them.
And
Um,
that work
so
would typically be what kind of support would you provide that senior leader?
So it can be succession planning and succession management. It can be pure leadership development, where we're helping them identify and develop their leaders for the future. And it can be performance management that is pushing out through the entire organization. And all of it is in this framework of behaviors and culture, how people get work done in the organization.
Well, so I'm just curious, do you find certain industries are more receptive to looking at their talent through that lens versus others that say, listen, we pay people a fair wage, we expect them to do their job, and then everybody goes home?
Yeah, well, and it could just be, the way we get our work and the referrals that we get, but it seems like the nonprofit organizations are the most tuned into the need for identifying and developing their talent.
Okay, that's really good distinction there because I would think they tend to be more missionally aligned top to bottom. People go work for enough, you go work for Greenpeace because it matters to you what Greenpeace does.
Yes,
It's not just
yes,
a job by and large.
yes. They're very socially responsible, so socially conscious,
Right.
and the for-profit businesses are coming along in that direction. Corporate social responsibility is becoming a really big thing.
Now, is that, and I can see that being a big thing. Clearly, Fortune 500 companies, they have entire departments focused on that and so on. Do you
Right.
see any of that coming down into the more privately held, owner-led businesses that may be smaller? Can they afford to be that socially conscious in their thinking? Do you hear any pushback on that? Or is that something they're embracing now with like maybe newer owners maybe being a little younger right now?
Yeah, I think you're right about that newer owners are much more tuned into this. Millennials and Gen Xers are very concerned about the society that they live in and reaching out to people who have traditionally been excluded in that society. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is we're seeing a big trend with organizations of all sizes, whether they're privately run or whether they're large publicly owned corporations.
Okay, well, and I'm visualizing, an owner who's working really hard for the last 20 years to build up their business. They're getting, chances are, like a lot of owners I know, their line of credit is tied to their house in some way, so it's like
Yes,
very personal. So when you start thinking about things like, empowering your people, aligning to them, dealing with those things, how would you respond to the owner that says, "Well, that's all touchy feely stuff. I can't afford it.
right.
How does that make me any money?"
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, I would ask that owner, have they hit any areas where they've gotten stuck, where they've been unable to execute, and to really look deeply at that and figure out why is that happening? And it's very often happening because of the soft stuff that people the way that individual is leading the organization is setting a tone that's putting up barriers for the organization to get things done and for people to get things done in the organization. So I would say, if you want this business to continue, if you want to have some sort of legacy coming out of this business, you got to pay big attention to who's going to succeed you and how they're going to treat the people that are going to be working for them. What kind of tone, what kind of cultural tone are they going to set that's going to take away the barriers to the organization getting things done, and most importantly, to the organization being able to innovate. You've probably heard of Warren Bennis. He's another leadership development expert, and he has been saying for years that the way that leaders engage with employees has to change. That this top-down leadership and, I'm in charge here and you're going to do things my way just doesn't cut it anymore. And it's really stifling innovation. And organizations have to innovate if they're going to survive. So that would be my message to an owner operator who's, kind of given me the soft stuff nonsense.
But you'd say it as politely as possible.
Absolutely. Very tactfully.
Very tactfully. Well, it's interesting because, it does tie back to issues of performance. I mean, at some point, every organization, as much as maybe some owners would rather replace everybody with a machine or a computer, the reality is they still need staff.
Yeah.
And so people are still people. They haven't changed in the same basic parameters for thousands of years. Human beings function a certain way. So it sounds like you're saying, look, if you don't pay attention to these things, one of the big challenges is going to be even attracting people to your company.
Yeah.
So could you just expand a little bit on just like the job seeker? And we're hearing a lot now at the current time in the press about employers not even being able to find people to fill open slots.
Right. It's amazing.
Which could be, maybe that's unemployment, maybe it's not, whatever's affecting it. But there's other factors here about what people are looking for in a job. So maybe a couple of tips there, Pat, would be helpful to our audience in terms of some things to think about the next time you're thinking of posting a position.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know that I'm part of Beacon, which is the area's executive networking organization. And when we have people coming in who are looking for a career change, one of the things that they talk with us about is how important it is to them to find the right culture in the organization. And, that's different to a lot of different people because it's driven by your values. But the tip that I would have for both the employer and the job seeker is really be open and honest about your culture. And if as a business owner, if people are turned off, if you're having a hard time, you've got the people, you're interviewing them, but they're turning down your offers, you got to think about whether is the culture driving them away. Did they hear things about the way we operate here and the way we get work done that really doesn't appeal to them?
You mean that doesn't stay within the four walls all the time?
Oh my God, have you heard of Glassdoor?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, employees are out there talking about what they like and what they don't like about the companies that they've worked for. And employers are monitoring things like Glassdoor very closely. And they're trying to change the way they operate based on what they hear. Because as you say, the talent market is so tight.
Well, it triggered a thought as well, Pat, which is years and years ago, one of the first business bestsellers was In Search of Excellence. Tom Peters, I think Robert Waterman was his colleague. They were McKinsey guys. And so everybody caught the excellence bug, every large company. And I remember I was living in New York at the time, and I went to DMV to get my license renewed. And every New Yorker, if you talk to New Yorkers, they'll tell you that's like the one place you don't want to go. It's like the seventh circle of hell. It's just a terrible place to go. Everybody there it just was not. It may be different today, but I'm telling you, 30 years ago, it was like a very unpleasant experience. So I remember standing online, and I remember the person. I just couldn't help notice as I was getting closer to the window how surly the DMV worker was. And you had guys, business titans from Wall Street, like showing up, but I am so and so, and she didn't care. She said, "No, you're going to line 17 to get that finished." Doesn't care. It didn't matter. And what was ironic or very funny for me in that moment in time, I remember getting up to the window, and behind her was a big banner, "Committed to Excellence," because the boss read the book and decided to put up the banner. So how does a business owner listening to this say, okay, if I buy into this and I start doing this, what are some like immediate steps that are real, not just a banner, making an empty declaration that everybody inside and out know isn't true?
Yeah. Kind of like the old Enron set of values.
Oh yeah.
And the top value is integrity, right?
Yeah, that's good.
There's a saying that culture's the shadow of the leader.
Okay. Like
And
that.
that commitment to excellence is only going to happen if the leader is modeling excellent behaviors, right? And unfortunately, the crap rolls downhill. So if I'm surly with my employees as a leader, they're going to be surly to my customers. I've got to pattern my behavior in a way that I want my employees to treat my customers. And oftentimes, what that means is that the leader has to take on some humility. They've got to say, okay, I am the leader here, but without my followers, I'm not going to be successful. So I need to get out. I need to talk to them. I need to get out of my office and go on a tour. I need to talk to them, and I need to listen intently to what they have to say to me, and I need to take it seriously. Not that I'm going to promise that I'm going to do everything that I hear from them, but that they're going to raise issues. They're going to raise problems. And once I've been out there talking with them, I've got them engaged. They're beginning to think, oh, well, maybe this person's not so bad. You know, she's not wearing her position on her sleeve. She's not, trying to intimidate me. She's really interested in what I have to say. And so that kind of atmosphere then allows you to pull the employees in and get them involved in the problem solving. And if one of the problems is that our customers think we're surly, how can we change that? Help me figure out how to change that, but bring everybody into that process. It's called inclusion, and we call it collaborative leadership. So it's very different from the traditional top-down, directive, aggressive, do what I say kind of leadership. It's much more inclusive and much more engaging.
So Pat, I certainly don't have anywhere near the expertise you have in this space, but occasionally, like they say, what is it? Even a blind squirrel gets the nut occasionally. So I was coaching a client, and they were going over the org chart, and I said, "Why don't you try this on for size?" Because it's a client who wanted to get out of the day to day as much. I said, instead of putting your box at the top, put it at the bottom.
Yes.
And support your people. Like, what do they need to be successful? Was that good advice?
That was great advice.
I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm listening to you, Pat. I'm saying, I don't know, maybe I didn't tell
that's
her.
all about humility, right? It's all about saying, I don't have all the answers, but I know my people do, because they're the closest to my operations and my customers.
They're doing the doing. Right.
Exactly.
In any size company. Wow.
And you can, as a leader, you can throw a lot of roadblocks in the way of them doing what they're doing.
So Pat, have you, and this would just be interesting, and obviously I'm not looking for you to name any names, but if you could think of an example of somebody you felt was like far away from being what you're describing, but they've made the transition. Is there a success story there?
Yeah.
Or are we all victims of our initial Myers-Briggs and that's it, we're stuck?
No, we're never stuck. We can always change. And a great example, which I can talk about because we published an article on it, is Mainline Health. They're a regional health system with 5 hospitals and other entities. And all those entities came together. They formed this system in order to increase their buying power and just compete more effectively in the marketplace. And the CEO and the senior vice president of human resources there were very savvy guys. And they knew that this restructuring was great, and it was getting them part of the way where they needed to go. But they still needed to do further improvements in order to increase quality and safety and financial performance of the organization. And they were savvy because they knew that the behaviors of the leaders had to change, and that would create a sea change in the behaviors throughout the organization. And what they needed was more collaboration. So just to make the long story short, we helped them develop a behavioral model that was focused around collaborative skills and collaborative behaviors. And that became the roadmap for them for setting the expectations for everybody in the organization, from the CEO through the individual contributors. And what they saw coming out of that, just one of the many things they saw coming out of that, was a greater sharing. So they now had integrated protocols and practices across the entire system, so that, and this was the CEO's vision, so that if I, as a patient or the family of a patient, walk into any mainline health facility, I know I'm in a mainline health facility. I know what I can expect, and I know the quality with which I'm going to be, with which my treatment is going to be delivered.
So that's a real interesting when you think about it as a template or a pattern for acquisitions, right? So sometimes even smaller companies acquire other small companies, and then how do you manage that? It seems like it needs a lot of intentionality from the top
Yeah.
to make that happen.
Yes, it absolutely does. Because what happens when you bring organizations like that together is they each have their own culture. And and that's okay. You don't have to do away with their cultures, but you need to understand where those cultures might be clashing and where those cultures might be fighting what you want to achieve as a bigger organization. And you have to start making that culture change, which is exactly what Mainline Health did. They really created a culture change.
And so I think about I get frequent flyer points at Mainline Health, by the way, because I live it's in my in my backyard. I've done a few ER visits over the years. You live long enough, you do that. So
That's right.
very happy with them, by the way. Okay, so
Good, good.
and I'm still here. So no, but what's interesting about that is you start thinking about it for the listener on this podcast, thinking, "Gee, okay, how does this make sense financially?" I tell you right away, just bringing organizations together, efficiencies, um, error rates going down, all those things that can cost you a ton, especially like in something sensitive like healthcare. You can't get it wrong. You got to get the patient file right. You have to cooperate between doctors at different facilities. No different than if you're making widgets or spacey sprockets. It's the same basic principle. You got to get it right, and you got to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah,
So that's very exciting, Pat. And thank you so much for sharing with our audience these insights. And it's not touchy feely; it's real good business. So I
it is
love
good
that.
business sense.
Absolutely. Well, if somebody wanted to know more about your work, how you help companies, or wanted to just reach out to you, what's the best way they can get a hold of you?
The best way to do that is to just visit our website, which is talentstrategypartners, all one word, .com. There's a contact page there. So you can send us an email. There's a phone number. You can give us a call. And that's the best way to do it. And there's also a free resource there. If you want to do a deeper dive into the kinds of things that we've been talking about today,
Mm-hmm.
there's an ebook there called Say Yes to Innovation. And all you have to do is, go to that contact page, send us an email, and we'll send you a copy of that ebook. It's short. It's got like 5 chapters and takes a much deeper dive into the leadership characteristics that will drive cultures of innovation.
That's fantastic, and we'll have an explicit link to that on our show notes when we publish this podcast.
Great.
So thanks again. So thank you, Pat, for sharing your wisdom, your insights for our audience. We really appreciate it.
Jose,
And
it has been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
you're welcome. Take care.